In early 2022, the Biden administration signaled it would not just continue Trump-era tariffs on Chinese goods, it would escalate economic pressure. In February, the US government tightened export restrictions on Chinese companies, adding more than 30 to the so-called unverified list. Washington also expanded stricter trade blacklists throughout the year and moved to delist from US exchanges Chinese companies that US regulators said they couldn't audit. Then came the Ukraine conflict. The US pressed China, India and the rest of the developing world to abide by US and European sanctions against Russia, without success. A March 18th video call between President Xi Jinping and Joe Biden sought to stabilize relations in the wake of the conflict. It also served as a chance for President Biden to reaffirm the One China policy over Taiwan. But in May, the US State Department changed language about the island on its website. The mixed messages over Taiwan continued throughout 2022. And while high-level contacts in May and June talked about cooperation over global issues like climate change, the US continued to tighten economic sanctions against China. The nearly 2.5-hour call in July between Xi and Biden was candid. Xi said the One China principle is the, quote, political foundation of US-China relations. Beijing officials later expressed deep reservations over the planned visit to Taipei by second in line to the presidency, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
The U.S. side abandons the One China principle, colludes with the Taiwan secessionist forces, condones and supports separatist activities, and constantly breaks the status quo across the strait. It must take full responsibility for the escalation of tensions in the region.
The US government restricted Chinese access to advanced semiconductor chips and the equipment to make them.
U.S. policymakers need to listen more to the rational and objective voices of the business and academic communities. Stop handling China-U.S. relations with the outdated mindset of zero-sum games. Stop letting its China policy be guided by the so-called political correctness. Seriously uphold the principles of mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, and win-win cooperation, and bring China-U.S. relations back onto the track of sound and steady development.
As the year headed to a close, the first face-to-face meeting happened between the two presidents in Bali. She said the US and China need to explore the right way to get along with each other. Both sides resumed cooperation on climate change. The US exempted hundreds of Chinese products from punitive tariffs, and China agreed to have US-listed Chinese companies audited by US regulators. Throughout 2022, Washington moved to strengthen the so-called Quad, however, the US, Japan, Australia and India. China dismissed it as a sea foam that would soon dissipate. The US also continued to press other allies, especially in Europe, to increase economic pressure on China. And now in 2023, the US shot down what Beijing called a wayward weather balloon after tracking its passage over the US. Beijing called the intervention an overreaction, but the US political and media establishment were almost hysterical in their rhetoric. 3 more seemingly innocent objects were shot down in the following days. But in recent days, US President Joe Biden has hinted that he wants to put the balloon incident behind Washington and Beijing, saying he wants to talk directly to Chinese President Xi Jinping and restore full diplomatic relations. But consider the atmosphere and the divisiveness of US politics and China used as a weapon in that. Well, whether detente will happen remains to be seen. Nathan King, CGTN, Washington.